What we're doing today is we're having a conversation with Karen Grace Pankratz. Karen has over 22 years of experience in the area of HR. She works as an HR director for MCC. She has done that for a number of years, 10 years or more. She is also part of the executive board of the national conference. She leads our personnel committee. She has been an invaluable resource to me personally and answering questions. She's extremely busy, particularly now in this season, and just prior to this season with the closure of 10,000 village stores, all of these things that have happened with MCC. She's a very busy person, but she makes time for us whenever we ask her, and she has very graciously agreed to lead us through a conversation that can be very helpful to us in this time.
Okay, well, thanks for having me this afternoon. It's good to see so many of you joining the call. When I met with Carson and Elton and Kara to start sort of planning how we wanted to manage this meeting, they suggested I put together some common questions or topics that have come up, that I've been getting, and that we would try and go through those. So I have 5 things. Workforce planning options that should be considered by employers. Then if we go to talking about temporary layoffs, I get a lot of questions about temporary layoffs. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about that. Also, what about benefits during workforce planning options? So whether that's temporary layoff or reductions of FTE, or how does that affect benefits? Government plans, what are available to employers and employees during this time? And can I just say, this is one that's shifting and changing, feels like by the hour. We're waiting for the Minister Morneau to speak now in Toronto to give us some more information on the wage subsidy. So that also is still continuing to change. And then remote work and self-care. These are some really big things that I think we need to be thinking about, and how to manage when we are working remotely, and how to self-care and manage under these situations. So those are the things I thought of. I hope we have lots of time for questions, because I'm sure there's other things you may want to raise, and many of you may have experience and knowledge on things that would be good just to share with this group as well. I don't pretend to be an expert. I feel like I am an expert, but I'm not the only expert in the room or on this call, and I'll just share what I've learned, and then happy to hear from others as well. So in this time of COVID, what as an employer do we need to think about in terms of workforce planning? That would be the first question we have. We are now facing a situation where governments are asking us to self-isolate. There are restrictions on the amount of people that can gather together, the number of people, and there are business requirements government requirements to close businesses in many provinces. Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba has mandated effective tomorrow that all non-critical businesses must be closed. So what does that mean? So for many of us, whether we are being legislated to or not, we have workforces and workplaces that are working now remotely. So ensuring that employees have the appropriate equipment and resources to be able to work from home, that's important. And ensuring that work is able to be done from home. There are some essential services that cannot be done from home, things like payroll. Those services are usually exempted from orders to close businesses. So for example, at MCC, even though our office will close, the staff that do payroll, for the time that they need to be doing payroll, because that's not our primary business, but because we do payroll, we are allowed to be in our office to do those services for the time that we need to do it. So check, depending on what province you're in, you should check the legislation, especially if you're mandated to be closed, around what services can actually still be performed in your business. the other piece around workforce planning are what options do you have if financially or because of lack of work, you do not have work for people. So that is a reality that is coming for most businesses. Now, we'll talk about the wage subsidy, which does provide a very good option for employers, but there are going to be positions where either the jobs cannot be done from home and or there is not, we don't know how long this will last, and there may not be enough work to keep everyone employed depending on the period of time that this situation will last. So what are your options as an employer? There's reduction of FTE. So you can reduce someone's FTE. So if you have someone who works full-time and really probably there's only enough work to have them work half-time or 0.8, you can do that. You would have to give as much notice as possible, although the legislation, I'll just say the other thing that's changing a lot, not just government benefits, is legislation in each province around employment standards. I get updates from our attorney and different attorneys we work with across different provinces that say, oh, this province has just lifted this restriction as per employment standards. So it's an ever-moving field, I would say right now. The other option, so there's FTE reduction and or there's temporary layoff. And when we talk about the government benefits that are available, those are some of the things to take into consideration when you're thinking about, do I reduce an FTE or do I temporarily lay off someone? Some of the things to think about are if they're entitled to a specific benefit, like for example, the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, which would provide for $2,000 a month. Some literature says up to $2,000 a month. The government website just says $2,000 a month. So we're understanding that it's going to be a flat $2,000 a month. But again, the applications only come out April 6th and we don't have the full details yet. But given if it is a flat $2,000 a month, you know, it may be more beneficial to temporarily lay off some staff and then consolidate the work in other staff who could work then more hours or not have their FTE reduced. So if you have 2 staff people working 0.8, maybe you would lay one person off, they would get the benefit, and another person would assume all the work and it would fit into FTE. I mean, you have to look at this, it depends on the pay level of the person. There's lots and lots of considerations, but there are some staff you may have where a $2,000 a month benefit would be close to equivalent or a much greater benefit than they would get if they had been on EI versus, or even having their FTE reduced. So these are the things you have to think about. But in terms of your options, I think primarily at least what we've been looking at is FTE reductions and or temporary layoffs. And consolidating work into packages as best we can to allow people to work from home for as long as we can do that. So first option, get everybody working from home, get as much work as you can. And then as work no longer allows and or finances no longer allow, you look at reductions to your payroll envelope. Are there questions about that, or should we talk a little bit about temporary layoff and benefits to go with that and then have questions? I'm not sure how we want to do that.
So are there any questions particularly to the workforce plan that you may have? You know, some of you may right now be doing this with doing a workforce triage to see, you know, what employees would fit into certain categories and which ones would be best laid off, which employees would be best kept based on information you're getting from these programs that the government are unveiling. Are there any questions around the workforce plan? Paul?
Yeah, just a quick question on what about the employer support that was announced the other day, up to 75% of that wage support. Can you speak to that at this point as well then? Because that would be another option, right?
Yeah,
so
for
maybe
sure.
We'll wait. Can we wait until, because you're going to get to all the government stuff in the next little bit here, right?
I mean, it's all connected. It's really hard to separate it out because it's all connected. And I mean, I can just kind of talk for a bit. We'll cover these topics and then we'll have questions maybe, because you're right, Paul. It is, it will certainly affect your decision in terms of your workforce plan. Like I said, we're waiting for more details from Minister Morneau, but this was originally the plan that had been announced by the government last week, the beginning of the week, where charities, nonprofits, and small businesses could get up to 10% of a wage subsidy back to a maximum of $25,000. On Friday, Prime Minister Trudeau announced that it would actually be changed to a 75% wage subsidy. Well, we heard about that probably on Thursday, and then Friday he announced a few more details, and the details that he released was that it would be for any business. It didn't matter the size or the number of employees, as long as you could show a reduction of 30% in revenue. So there's still some questions about what does that mean? What does that look like? How quickly do we have to show that reduction? But if you can show a 30% reduction in revenue, you can claim 75% of your wages that you have paid. So you have to actually have people on the payroll and are paying the wage to get a 75% rebate. And it's on salaries up to $58,750 a year, or $873 or some dollars a week, whatever that is. So any employees you have that are below that salary cap, you can claim 75% of their wage. Any employees above that salary cap, you can claim 75% of $58,750. The only cap that we're aware of right now is the salary cap. We're not aware and it hasn't been announced that there's any cap on the total amount. It's right now 75% of your salary envelope with the salary cap at $58,750. How that money is distributed has not yet been announced. Originally in the plan, you were just supposed to deduct your subsidy from the remittances you made to CRA. But nobody makes a 75% salary. Nobody is submitting that much to CRA. So it's not going to come off our remittances to CRA, or at least not fully. So how the government will actually get that money back to employers is also one of the questions.
Dennis Federal has a question.
Yeah.
On the subsidy, Karen, I read on the government's website yesterday that subsidy is available for 3 months only.
Right now, it's available for 3 months only, and it is backdated to March 15th. So this counts for any wages you've paid already. You can claim back to March 15th.
Okay, thank you.
And yes, it's right now, it's a 3 month, most of the measures the government has announced is till June 15th, or 3 months. That's also the same for the emergency response benefit. Right now, they're saying that's till June, and then after that, you'd transition to EI. So maybe I'll talk about that next benefit. And I know that there was a resource that went out, I think Kara distributed, and it was put together by Lowen Cruz, I think his name was, and it was very good. And big thanks to him for putting this together. I'm not sure if it's been sent out to this whole group. It was put together before this wage subsidy information was changed, so it still lists a 10% wage subsidy, so that is now changed. But it has a good summary on the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit. So this, I mean, not last week, but the week before, the government received almost 1 million applications for EI benefits. And I think they realized, like, the EI system was not set up for this kind of volume or this kind of situation. And so they had originally put in place, if you are working and eligible for EI and you're laid off, you'll apply for EI. If you're self-employed, you'd apply for this other benefit. They had 2 other emergency benefits they created. It was kind of confusing. It was confusing for me, and I read about this stuff all the time. And then they made the announcement, we're going to create this one Canadian Emergency Response Benefit. Anyone over the age of 15 is eligible. You have to be a resident of Canada. In the last 12 months, you have to have made at least $5,000, either from employment, self-employment, or EI benefits if you were on maternity benefits. So if someone, for example, was on maternity benefits, comes back to work, gets laid off, they'd still be eligible for this. There's no specific number of hours requirement like there is with an EI claim.
Randy
So-
has a question.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't sure if you'd said this. By the way, thanks for serving us in this way, Karen. But I just think a question about the tax. Is this after tax or before tax? These $2,000 a month and $58,000. And is this before or after?
Okay, so the wage subsidy is you can claim 75% of a $58,750 salary. That's your gross, right? So you would do, my gross wage envelope was this month $100,000, and let's say everybody was below let's say everybody was making $50,000 a year on that, and your wage envelope that went to your payroll processor was $100,000, you could claim $75,000 back. You're still taking all the regular deductions off your employees, you know, all those things. On the emergency response benefit, has anybody heard that? I feel like I've heard somewhere that it's not, that's going to be net, but has someone heard, sorry, Jeff, I think you put up your hand.
Trudeau did mention briefly that he was changing it to tax-free. He
Right.
didn't make it clear whether or not that would be, they wouldn't deduct taxes off of it and you'd be taxed later or not. And so we're still waiting for that to come out from the federal government.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that clarification. I thought I'd heard that that was a change. Initially, they had not been clear or they hadn't said, and then I thought I read somewhere, so thanks for that. And just to say that the emergency response benefit is specifically tied to losing your employment or your income related to COVID. If you were laid off because of some other reason or terminated because of some other reason not related to COVID, you would still go through the normal channels of applying for EI if you were eligible. This emergency response benefit is specific to COVID. So if you are laying people off, there are new codes that you would include or reasons you would put on the record of employment that are specific to COVID. And you should check with your, like the payroll providers will have that information. There are other benefits the government is working on. They are increasing the child tax credit. They're increasing the goods and services tax credit. Like there's a few other places where they're increasing subsidies, particularly to help people who would be in lower income brackets who are eligible for these kinds of credits. So those pieces are also being supplemented. But for an employer, the pieces I would highlight are the emergency response benefit, which is the initial thing for the first 3 months of a situation where you'd be temporarily laid off because of COVID. That's what's available to your employees. And then the wage subsidy, which we're hoping to hear a few more details about, that is specifically available to employers if you've had a 30% reduction in your revenue.
Dennis, Federal.
Karen, did they change that? Because originally when the CERB came out, it was 4 months, or was it not? Did they change that, or did I misread that?
No, it might be 4. I thought it was until June, but sorry if I'm getting that wrong.
Yeah, I just was on the website and it is until, it's 4 months.
4 months, okay, good. Yeah,
Okay,
4 months.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, okay, sorry. It's any period between March and October and you're eligible for it for 4 months. And when the 4 months is over, you would then switch to a different support plan. If you're eligible for EI, you'd move on to EI benefits.
Ed Wilms. You are muted, Ed.
Karen, is there a difference based on these different options about whether a person can continue to work?
Sorry, what do you mean? Like if there's options about a person can continue to work, like should they? Sorry, I'm not sure I'm clear.
Okay, I'm just wondering, so if in the event that we have to lay off, it's a financial issue, but the individual wants to continue to work, et cetera, are there any stipulations around saying, no, actually at this point, then you cannot work at what you've been doing, or can you continue to serve in those capacities even though you're being subsidized through EI or CURB or something like that?
Okay, are you saying if someone is temporarily laid off
Yeah,
and receiving a benefit, can they still work for you?
yeah,
Yeah.
if they would choose to.
Yeah, I mean, people can volunteer, I suppose. You just have to be very careful. I would say that you'd want to be very careful about that. I don't think anyone, of course, wants to be taking advantage, but you would, as an employer, run a risk if you had someone continuing to do the work that is part of their job description, but you're not paying them. Like, that's the scenario, I think, what you're saying, right? Is that, yeah. Yeah, if you have need for it, then I think, you pare down what is the essential service that you still need. And if there's a way to financially continue that, to do that, and perhaps the wage subsidy allows you to do that. The one other thing I will say that is not clear yet on the wage subsidy, and I'm hoping for clarity on that today, is one of the questions that was asked to the Prime Minister and the way he answered it made it sound like it would be possible for employers to only pay the 75% that the government gives you and not have to top up the full 100%. Because he made a comment about, we want to encourage employers to pay the additional 25% so that everyone is fully paid at 100% of their salary, which implies that an employer would have a choice to only pay the 75% that the government would subsidize. I don't actually know how that would work, because if you're supposed to claim 75% of the salary you're paying and you're only paying 75% of the salary, anyway, it's a bit of a circle there. But it seemed like he implied it would be possible to just keep someone on the payroll and pay what the government subsidy is. So we'll have to wait for clarification on that. So that might be a way to keep people on without much cost to the employer. I mean, there's always some overhead, but it would be very little, like your benefit costs and whatever other overhead you have. But yeah.
Sandra has her hand up. So Sandra.
Hi. Relating to Ed's question about someone who is working, I've had a couple of churches ask about some of their staff going to reduced hours, and maybe even going beyond the 55%, going to a 25 or 40% FTE, well, not FTE, but workday. How does that work in relation to these programs? Would the churches then pay for their, say, 25% work that they're doing? Then they go into the EI to supplement, or whatever program we're talking about, the CERB or whatever, because it's not specifically black and white, where you're either working all in or you're not working at all. Yeah. What happens to the people who are working far below, but yet, yeah, how does that sort of relate?
Yeah, according to the emergency response benefit, which is the $2,000 a month, you cannot receive any income in order to be eligible for that. So this is where I was saying before, and this is where you want to be looking at your workforce planning sort of as a whole. Like, are there ways to consolidate the work and keep people working at a reasonable FTE and then lay people off and they can get the benefit that's $2,000 a month, versus having everybody work a 0.3 or a 0.4 FTE where they're not eligible for the emergency response benefit. They might be earning less than what they get on the emergency response benefit. And they could be, like, this is one of the challenges. If you reduce people's FTE, you could be penalizing them if they eventually have to be temporarily laid off in terms of what they might be eligible for with EI. Now, EI, on your record of employment, you go back and list the last 26 weeks of work and the wages received, but you want to be careful about reducing FTE in terms of penalizing people if they eventually have to go, and it could impact their benefit on EI. It wouldn't impact their emergency benefit that they get for the first 4 months, but it might impact going forward. So yeah, there's all these kinds of considerations to think about. So when this is why, like, I mean, it's an option that's available to us and we may have to take. I don't love reducing FTE just because of some of the implications it has. I mean, it's one thing to go from a full-time to a 0.8 or something like that, but if you're going from a full-time to a 0.4, or you know, like you're really doing a significant reduction, you could be jeopardizing like, you know, things like even RSP contributions and like all these other things that are impacted when your FTE is reduced. One thing I was gonna just say, I don't know if Shar is on this call, but she got some information for us about the benefit plan. So I was gonna just touch on benefits.
Can we just, before we go there, we have a couple of other questions
okay,
that are
sorry.
related to that. So Rob Thiessen and then Dennis Federal.
Okay.
Hey, yeah, good conversation. Thank you so much. I had this question from a pastor about they're reducing or going on EI or using one of the benefits where they're not laid off. And I think, like, just as I was wrestling with it, I think also churches have different kind of classes of staff. Some of their staff are clearly, well, everybody's an employee, but some of them are just operating under a job description, and they're doing administrative work or janitorial, all kinds of functions. And then there you have pastors who also have a job description. And how I advised that pastor was, you know, when you're laid off, your organization, your elders, they can't hold you to a job description anymore. You know, that's you're not the employee, but we also are all members of a family of churches, and we all volunteer. Everyone volunteers, and so you know, there's a lot of things that a shepherd can continue to do in their church as a lay leader, as other lay leaders would be doing. And I don't think there's any, you know, I can't see any reason why the government or anybody else would criticize that. You're not functioning as an employee anymore. You're not held to a job description, but you continue to function as a lay member within the church, carrying on shepherding ministry as any one of the leaders would do. And given, you know, for some churches that I think would help them a lot, especially smaller churches where they're not so dependent on, you know, online services. They're really scaling back to a house church kind of a model. So that was the advice I gave that pastor. But because we're not all our employment, you know, the framework where we have employees, it applies in quite different ways in different churches and different contexts. Anyway, your comments.
Yeah, it's not that I would be worried that the federal government would be coming back to claw back their benefits. If they're not receiving income, then they should be eligible for their, you know, emergency response benefit. Where you would have an issue is with your provincial employment standards, which would say, I mean, you would just have to be very cautious. Like we run into this in our thrift stores all the time. We have thrift employees who are paid staff who work in our stores, but they might only work half time, and then they want to volunteer some of their time. And our advice is always be very careful and do something very different that's not part of your job, because, and again, I'm not saying that people are litigious or want to take advantage of this situation, but under employment standards, you would be liable as an employer if an employee went and said, you know, during this period I was supposed to be laid off, I actually also had to do all these things which are related to my job, and you could be liable. I'm just saying, you know, so there is a risk. So I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm advising you that there is a risk in that, and you'd have to be very careful. And in these times, people are under a lot of stress and people feel a lot of pressure. And of course, we want to give back to our faith communities and our churches and volunteer. But there's also could be pressure and put on, I'm just saying, there could be pressure put on employees, pastors, that they'd be laid off, but that they also continue to provide services. And just to say that that wouldn't be expected in other situations of employment. Now, I wouldn't necessarily always volunteer in other places where I would work necessarily, but you know, I just would really caution us on that piece, that it wouldn't be an expectation or a pressure point. And if someone freely wanted to say, I'd like to help and still do this, that would be one thing, but you certainly run a risk as an employer, and a church and a conference is an employer.
Okay. Dennis Federal.
Two points. The first one is circling back to what Rob said and what you just mentioned. That just occurred to me: if employees are laid off and then they continue to do similar work under the auspices of doing the volunteer work, and then for whatever reason get injured, and WCB may say, well, you're laid off, so we're not covering you, or there may be other insurance ramifications to this, that they will say, well, no, you were laid off. What are you doing here in this job place? So well,
for sure, WCB would not cover, or WSIB or whatever province you're in would not cover you because you are laid off. So exactly. It would be whatever insurance you have, I guess, for your other volunteers, but like, will that cover you if you're technically an employee? I mean, that would certainly be another factor, but for sure they would not be covered under their workplace insurance.
I'd like to circle back on the 75-25 subsidy, just to be very clear, because you talked about it. It's a bit of a vicious cycle, because the 75%, it's only claimable after you've actually paid out your employees, right? It's not something, I can't show a payroll to the government saying, here's my payroll for the year, so every month I want to get this. You have to actually prove, and this is a question, you have to prove you paid this out to your employees?
Well, I don't actually have the details yet.
Okay.
But my assumption is yes, because the government only wants to, I mean, I could show my annual payroll, but I mean, I have lots of fluctuations in my annual payroll, not besides COVID, right? Like, I mean, I have people coming, I have people going, I have people taking leave and all these different things. And then, you know, they don't want to pay for staff who you're not paying for. So they only want, the government wants to provide the subsidy, because the whole point of this is to pay a subsidy for employees that you're keeping on the payroll, because they want employers to keep people on the payroll. So this is one of the challenges in terms of the timing and the cash flow. Like, how quickly will you receive the benefit, and like how quickly would you receive a deposit or a check from the government, and what kind of administrative work is required? Those are all questions we still have.
Okay, thank you.
So we have Emily Rempel, and then there is a question in the chat that I will raise right after Emily.
Hi, I just have also one question about the 75%, and that is the 30% reduction of revenue. Would passive revenue like investment losses count?
Yeah, I don't actually know how they're gonna, I mean, if that's your revenue stream, potentially. I mean, we're also trying to figure that out at MCC, like how do you measure a 30% drop in donations, like right now at this point? And we have all our thrift stores have closed, and what 10,000 Villages stores that were left have closed. But in terms of, what happens, I mean, we're losing also a lot of money on the exchange rate, because we have to exchange all our money into US dollars to send internationally. And because of that going down because of COVID, are we going to be able to claim that? I don't have an answer for that at this point. I think we have to wait for the government to tell us what counts as revenue. Yeah.
I have a question from Phil Gunter, and I think that this question will be able to then shift us into talking about some of the benefit packages and the continuation of benefit package. So Phil is wondering about, in a time of temporary layoff and carrying over benefits, who pays the employee's portion pensions, those kind of things? Does it continue to be shared as in some cases? Who does that? So maybe we can move into temporary layoffs and benefits.
Yeah, well, I can start, and if Shar is here, I'm happy to have her also come in because she's been the point person with the benefit provider. My understanding is that the contract that your benefit provider has allows you to extend benefits on periods of temporary layoff. At this point, I think it's to April 30th. And that would be to continue your group health. Oh, sorry, 6 months. I think it was originally till April 30th, and then I think you got a 6-month extension. Is that right, Shar? Are you here?
Yeah, that's right. We've got 60 days after layoff for disability extension and 6 months for life, health and dental, everything else.
Okay. And Shar, how is it split right now? Is it all employer paid or is it split between employer and employee?
The employee has to pay the long-term disability premium. That's the only one that the employee must pay. And we leave it up to churches. Most of them split 50-50, but we leave it up to churches how they want to split that.
Okay. So there's a couple of pieces. So our plan allows benefits to continue. So that's one piece. LTD, of course, is separate from your other insurances. Sorry, Shar, were you going to say something?
Nope, I'm just muting myself in case my dogs bark.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the option is available to allow the benefits to continue. If you have a cost sharing, you can continue the cost sharing so that you can require, like if it's 50-50, the employer pays 50% and the employee pays 50%. Also, if you have to reduce an FTE, so for example, if you have someone who works full-time and you're reducing them to 0.7, the benefits, and for that we're talking about LTD life insurance, can remain at their substantive FTE, so what their original FTE is, so that they're not penalized. Because if you go down to 70%, then your life insurance would go down and your LTD amount would go down. So that is also protected. If your FTE goes down, you can keep your benefits at the original rate, but it means the premiums are at that original rate. So the employee is still paying 50% and the employer paying 50%. Here's the reason why it's good to continue benefits. Well, there's a couple of reasons why it's good to continue benefits. One, I think it's good for your employees and employee morale, and in this time of stress for employees, if they were affected, either FTE reduced or temporarily laid off, to know that their benefits would continue and they'd have that option to continue them. The second reason is around some of the rules around temporary layoff. So we haven't talked about that yet, but if you were in a situation where you needed to temporarily lay off employees, and again, knowing this subsidy is coming may certainly reduce the number that maybe, like, a week ago you thought, oh, we're going to have to temporarily lay off a lot of employees. Now maybe you don't have to temporarily lay off any or fewer, but the ones that you do, there are specific rules in each province around temporary layoff. If you have to give a notice period, how long a temporary layoff period can last. Usually there is a restricted, like in Manitoba, it's 8 weeks is the period for temporary layoff. Now, some provinces are changing some of the rules around that, but there usually are specific periods that you're allowed to temporarily lay off an employee before it becomes a permanent termination. And when it becomes a permanent termination, you would have to pay out the legal notice that's required and the job ends. But if you are on temporary layoff and as an employer you are providing some kind of benefit to the employee, which usually is something like an extension of their insurance benefits, even if it's a split cost between the employer and the employee, then you can extend the temporary layoff period if you need to. to a longer period. Like it's not indefinite, of course, but it would extend, say, past the 18 weeks or 13 weeks in some provinces, whatever it is. And I have a sheet that I can send to Kara. I got a legal opinion on temporary layoffs and forced vacation time for most provinces, certainly all the Western provinces and New Brunswick. Nothing in Quebec. I'm sorry, Alain, you have your own rules there, and I'm still working with a lawyer there. But if I get anything, I can share with you as well. It outlines what each of the provincial requirements are on temporary layoff, how long you have, if you have to give a notice period. But I believe it's in every province. If you extend some kind of benefit to the employee, you can then extend the temporary layoff period if you need to. So that's another advantage to continuing benefits. If you do have to temporarily lay someone off and it needs to be extended past the legal, the initial requirement, you can do that if you provide a benefit.
Hey, Karen, you and I talked a bit about the sub-programs, the top-up programs, and you raised some concerns or some areas where you need to be aware of. Maybe you can touch on that for us.
Sure. So if you are temporarily laying an employee off, the first benefit they would get is this emergency response benefit. And as far as we know, you aren't allowed to do a top-up on that because you're not allowed to receive any other income. If the temporary layoff were to extend past those first 4 months that you're eligible for that, and the employee went on EI, there is a program called the sub plan that you are eligible to apply for. And I think, Elton, you said, like, I'm not sure if this is every conference, but I think the Canadian conference has already got a sub plan for sick leave. So I'm not sure if the other provincial conferences or other agencies that are on this call are also already part of a sub plan. It's something that you have to apply for through Service Canada, and it allows you to top up EI benefits under certain conditions. Many employers who do this apply under this for the sick benefit, so that if use it as a short-term disability insurance, so that if someone goes on sick EI will pay 55% of their salary, or up to 55% in terms of the maximum. And then the employer can top that up to 95% of the salary. Well, one of the other criteria you can apply for under the sub-program is for a workplace stoppage, a temporary workplace stoppage. So if you're on if you do have to lay someone off on a temporary layoff and they're under EI, you could, as the employer, top up their salary up to 95%. So some of the conditions: if you're already part of a sub-plan for sick, you just need to send in an amendment. And if you talk to your contact, you should have a contact, because the sub-plan is, you have to renew every, I forget, 2 or 3 years, and you should have some, hopefully you have some correspondence somewhere that has a contact that you can be in touch with. If you need a template, I think I have one, so let me know, Kara, through Kara, or if you have my email, you can be in touch with me. So you complete this template form saying that you'd like to do it. There's lots of flexibility. You do not have to top up to the same amount you top up your sick plan, so you can choose the amount you want to top up. So if someone's getting 55% of their salary from EI, and maybe you can afford to top up to 70%, so the additional 15, you can do that. You can choose for how long you do the top up. So you can say, well, we can afford to do this for an additional 4 weeks, or an additional 6 weeks, or 13 weeks, or however long you want the temporary plan to last. So you can choose the top up amount, you can choose the length of time, and if for any reason something happens significantly with finances that you could no longer do it, you can stop it at any time. There's no requirement or legal protection to the employee for the top up. It is a benefit that's given by the employer, and if for any reason you had to say, we can't do this anymore, you could stop. So you're not legally tied in just by making the application or even starting the process. So just some of the things to think about. One, it is an additional cost to the employer. Two, this wouldn't be something that employees would access until like after their 4-month emergency response benefit when they're actually on EI. And one of the things I say to consider is if you have staff who are having their FTE reduced, and so suddenly now you have someone who was say 0.8 working a 0.6 or a 0.5, or other kinds of, or you've had to reduce salaries for whatever other reason, and you have some employees who are still working but receiving a reduced salary, and you have employees who you've laid off who are getting a greater salary because of the top up, it can cause inequity in the workplace. And so I just want you to be thinking about those issues. So if you think that you might, this is a good plan and a good option, but one, you have to financially be able to support it. And two, you need to just be managing your workforce planning in a way that you can justify all the options you are considering.
Thank you. We are coming close to the end of this session. You also wanted to talk to us a little bit about work and self-care, and you had sent some information, which is all the conference ministers, the NMT have available in a folder. They can pass it on to anyone that wants to. But do you want to talk to us a little bit about some of the self-care issues that you want to highlight during this time?
Sure. So I think there were a couple of documents. One was one that we put together just to remind people about the fact that people are under a lot of stress. So think of the significant change that it is going through in people's lives. You have uncertainty and fear around health for you and your loved ones. You have uncertainty and fear around the security of your employment and livelihood for yourself and loved ones. You have changes in the way that you work and worship and connect with people. So people are going through significant trauma right now. Each of us on this call are going through significant trauma right now. And the people that we are supporting and trying to work with and care for are. And so I just wanted to make sure that this is not a piece that is forgotten. It is very, very important. So when I do check-ins with my staff, and when we do calls, our staff calls, we always start with a self-care check-in right now. What are you doing? What fun have you done? What are some things we need to talk about? Is everybody doing okay? We make the time to do those kinds of conversations because that's really important. I try and send, I have more check-ins now than I normally do with my staff. I try and send messages to the team every day, all these kinds of things, and encouraging them to find ways to practice mental wellness and self-care. So we'd sent a document that just talks about, these are typical reactions that you could be feeling during this time. So acknowledging that these feelings you're having of anxiety or agitation or stress or not able to concentrate, that's normal. Not to internalize it or think there's something wrong with you. That's a normal symptom of what's going on. And what are some things you could do to try to help alleviate that? So there's a list of some things. Making sure you're eating properly, making sure you're sleeping properly. Try not to work and extend your work day. I don't know about you. For me, I'm working 14, 15-hour days right now. It's very hard to step away from working at home. Harder than when I leave an office that I can close. And I'm actually, we have 4 people working at our house right now who are at home. So finding a dedicated space to work and then being able to leave it and find self-care time is very difficult. So just acknowledging those realities, trying to break from constantly watching the news, trying to take a break from other things, putting as much structure into your day as possible, finding time to do things that bring you joy, all of those things. They're listed in this document that I sent, but it's an important thing to talk about it when you're interacting with staff or church leaders or whoever that you're working with. Send out reminders by email, incorporate this kind of conversation into your meetings. And then I also sent another document that just had a few very basic tips on supervising work and leading remotely. Like, it's just really basic stuff, but there's lots of resources online as well. But for a lot of people, especially in church settings, like, this is totally new. Like, we don't do really working from home, right? And we're often working in community and collaborating with others. So just providing some tips on what are some things, good practices to connect your team and to be able to work productively remotely. That's an important thing to think about.
Karen, you had your hands up. You have a question?
I actually don't have a question. I just wanted to say, about 4 weeks ago already, when we started the crisis management on the COVID-19, we implemented a document, which is a tracker. So it's a wellness tracker that we send out organization-wide, and people fill that in for us on a regular basis. We meet as a crisis response team every single day, and we go through that tracker and we distribute the responsibility of the people to check in with people who have a problem. For example, yesterday, I picked up on someone who's have exactly what Karen has described for us. So we are checking in with that person, following up, and we continue to educate our people. You know, we've switched now from managing the crisis per se, where we had to move people and relocate people, to education and encouragement. So if anybody here would like to have a copy of our tracker, it's a very user-friendly form. You're more than welcome to email me, and I'm happy to have our crisis response team share that with you. Or I can send it on to you, Alton, or to Karen, and I'm happy, you know, to share it. It's a very easy way. It translates into an Excel spreadsheet that summarizes the results for us.
Perfect. If you can send it to me, Kara has developed a Dropbox kind of, I think is a Dropbox for us that we are putting all of those documents into, and then we can share with the provinces. The provinces can then share that widely as they see it.
We'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. That sounds great.
Karen, any closing comments that you want to make for us? Any advice, further advice for us? And then any from any of us, any questions that did not get answered here?
I just would say it's a lot of information to try and absorb and process. And I know a lot of it seems legal and technical, and it is. Understanding your provincial employment standards, understanding what's going on at the federal level in terms of benefits, it's a lot to keep track of. But thankfully, there are great resources that are available. And like, I'll send a few more things to Kara, so keep checking online in that resource center that she's putting up, and Karen's tracker can be put there, and any other resources that you've found helpful. I think it'd be great to have a bit of an online community for us to be able to share resources on. At this time, anything that you find that's been useful, devotions, prayers, other self-care resources, like if we can share them with each other, it's so helpful at this time. So that's probably how I would close, Elton.
Karen, there is a question for you before you go. You had mentioned that you are not particularly a fan of reduced FTEs. Could you expand on that thought a little bit?
It's not that I'm not a fan of it. It's just, it's complicated. Like, it has a lot of implications. It's certainly better than, I mean, well, it can be certainly better than not having any income at all, but you have to look at the options. Like, are you reducing someone from a 0.6 to a 0.3 or a 0.2? Well, would that be better off as putting them on the temporary benefit? Would they be getting more income on the emergency care benefit than they would be having their FTE reduced and not being eligible for any benefit because they're still getting a small amount of income? And is there a way to keep people more fully employed and shifting work, and then having others go on whatever benefits are available. I'm hopeful that with this, if this wage subsidy plan comes in, that it will help many of our churches and our conferences and other agencies to keep as many people as possible employed. I mean, that's the whole point of the plan. So I'm really hoping for a flexible and quick response through this wage subsidy. I don't mean to say don't reduce FTEs. There's just a lot of pieces to think about. So I don't mean to be negative about it. Just there's a lot of things that you have to think about in terms of, does it impact their EI contributions, their CPP contributions? Like if you're at a higher salary level, like above the 58,000 max, really, like you're already capping out on your EI and your CPP, it wouldn't have that much of an effect. So for your senior level people, it might be a better option than maybe for people at like a lower classification. So again, these are the things to think about when you're looking at changing FTE.
Well, Karen, I want to thank you so much on behalf of all of us in our churches for your, taking this time, even at a time where for you is so busy, for thinking of us, for giving the best that you can towards this family of churches. So thank you so much for it. Much appreciated. May the Lord bless you, continue to bless you in your work, and give you wisdom and grace as you deal with these situations in every day. So thank you again.